Yeah, so in the midst of this kind of module on samsara and nirvana. Yeah, so why don't we take some time, generate a positive motivation first? Yes. So we can think about ourselves. Well, why don't we take a moment, just focus on our breath or another object of placement meditation to generate some mental focus. And then generating a motivation, we can kind of combine um, reviewing a little bit what we've been discussing and learning about with generating a motivation. But first, because we want to include not only ourselves, but also all other sentient beings in our aspiration um, related to this session. So we can visualize ourselves surrounded by all sentient beings, beginning with our mother of this life and all our female family and friends to our left, and then our father of this life and all our male family and friends to our right. Then those whom we're most prone to become angry with or and we feel antagonized by, imagine directly in front of us, facing towards us. And then all the other sentient beings in human form seated around. So they can remember briefly. Um, so this module on samsara and nirvana, we started off talking about what is samsara. How samsara is essentially the process of taking rebirth and experiencing old age, sickness, and death again and again through the force of afflictive emotions and karma. So how we are beings that are part of that process. Therefore, we're in samsara. But samsara is essentially that process as it unfolds in the continuum of our aggregates of our body and our mind under the control of afflictive emotions. And for as long as that persists, then we experience different forms of suffering. The eight sufferings, the six sufferings, especially the three types of suffering. Suffering of change, and pervasive compounding suffering. And essentially dissatisfaction and unpleasant, miserable experiences again and again without end. But that all of this arises from fundamental ignorance, which we'll look at today. It is a misconception, and therefore, with wisdom dispelling that misconception, we can totally eliminate this whole process and abide in a state of everlasting kind of peace and happiness, well-being. So, however, whatever way you understand that yourself, then try to, on the basis of that, your own understanding, try to generate a positive motivation for this session, including yourself and all the other sentient beings. So then, if you like, you can visualize Shakyamuni Buddha or and your own teacher, or Shakyamuni Buddha in one as one essence with your own teachers in space in front of you. And remember the Buddha Dharma Sangha and their ability to free oneself and other sentient beings from all the sufferings of samsara. And we can recite Shakyamuni Buddha's name mantra as a way of going for refuge. Vayata Muni Mahan So Vayata Muni Mahan So Vayata Muni Mahan So So imagine white light rays radiate out from Buddha's holy body, purifying oneself and all other sentient beings of all the causes of samsara and all the sufferings of samsara. And then golden light rays radiate out from Buddha's holy body, blessing oneself and all of the sentient beings to have every form of well-being and happiness, wisdom and compassion, generosity, loving kindness, all positive qualities up to full enlightenment. Okay, so we can stop there for the preliminary prayers. Yeah, so what is this? I think it's the 5th session among the 6. So now I'm trying to remember I think the first session we discussed what is samsara mainly. The second session, the different kinds of suffering, those lists, the 8 types of suffering, the 6 types of suffering, 3 types of suffering. And then I think the third session, I think we spent the whole session on attachment, maybe. Looking at all different, what is attachment, causes of attachment, what are the drawbacks, what are the faults of attachment, and what are different antidotes. And then last session, we spent mostly on anger. Yeah, I believe we spent one session on each of those. Again, what is anger? What are the different varieties of anger, divisions? And what are the causes? What are the faults of anger, the drawbacks? And then different antidotes to anger. I believe that's what we did. And then, so this session and next session, yeah, like I said, we'll focus on the wheel of life. So, or the wheel of existence. Yeah, the wheel of life, wheel of existence. It's translated different ways. Sipe Korlu, in Tibetan. So, yeah, why don't I put a picture of it up while we're thinking about it? See, full screen. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this session and next session too. I'm not sure. I don't think. Yeah, I'm not sure how we'll divide up, but we'll look at the 12 links of dependent arising as they're depicted in the wheel of existence, and then especially the first 2 links, ignorance, which is the root cause of samsara, and because that's also ignorance is also the third of the root afflictive emotions of attachment, anger. Then ignorance is the root of both attachment and anger. So we'll look at ignorance in some detail. And then 2 kinds of karma. And then different ways of dividing up the 12 links of dependent arising. And then for the module, the only thing left really to look at is, well, the path to be free from samsara, which we'll just touch on briefly, but is the 3 higher trainings. So that we'll get in next week. So here's the Wheel of Life again, remember, from before. So I'll quiz you a bit. What is at the middle? What's depicted? Let's just remember the different parts overall. I mean, like the different sections of the whole illustration. So remember in the middle, what's depicted here by these three animals?
The three poisons.
The three poisons, yeah, the three poisons or the three root afflictions, which are, and can you match them to the animals?
The pig is ignorance. The snake is anger, and the dove is attachment.
Attachment, exactly. Yeah, very good. Okay, so then someone else. What's the next ring out depicts what? Thomas or Zella or Michael?
Aren't those, I mean,
It was Coda answering last time, right?
aren't those the root delusions?
No, that's what's in the middle, the three root delusions. But the next ring out with a half black and half white, what's depicted there?
I think that's positive and negative karma.
Exactly, yeah. Positive karma is the white side. The beings you see, they're going up as a human being, because these are the three types of rebirth now. The human being, and then a demigod and a god. So there are three types of rebirth that are through the force of positive karma. Yeah, so positive karma is depicted as white, and then negative karma is the black side. So, and that's represented by, well, it also includes one being from each of the three lower realms: an animal, a hungry ghost, and then a hell being here. Because those are the three types of rebirth within samsara that are taken through the force of negative or non-virtuous throwing karma. Yeah, and it has them kind of in order too. Like the hell being's the lowest because that's the heaviest suffering. The hungry ghost slightly less, and the animals is the least kind of heavy suffering. The three types. Okay, so then the next ring out depicts what?
Realms of existence.
That's right, the 6 realms of existence. Although there's actually only 5 sections. So yeah, so at the bottom here is the hells, and the hells, they should have, well,
There's
they
six.
should have hot and cold. Some depictions have clearly hot and cold. Here it's not so clear. Yes? It looks kind of like cold over here a bit, but it's not so clear. This is one of the surrounding hells. Anyway, this is the hells. And then this is the hungry ghosts here. You can tell because they have these bulging bellies and fire coming from their mouths. So that's different kinds of hungry ghosts. It's surprisingly similar to Dante's Inferno. You know, if you look at Dante's description of hell and the Inferno, it's very similar. He gives so many different like levels and different types of torture beings experienced. I doubt he studied Buddhism. So probably somehow in the Christian tradition arose a similar view. Although there was a contact between Buddhism and the West at the time of like the ancient Greeks, some of the ancient Greek philosophers. One of them, I think, went all the way to India. There was some of them seemed to know of Buddhism a bit. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. The description of hells is so similar, different traditions. And then animals over here. So these 3 on the lower half of the circle are the 3 lower rebirths, or 3 rebirths through the force of non-virtuous karma, like through anger. You know, intense anger is the main cause for hell. Intense like craving and like miserliness, selfish craving and miserliness is main rebirth for main cause for rebirth in as a hungry ghost. And then just kind of following sort of attachment to hedonistic pleasures, following attachment to pleasures of the five senses, like to, sexual contact and lust for like food, drink, and so forth. That kind of leads to rebirth as an animal, mainly through attachment. And then, so then the upper realms can be divided in 2 or 3. So this is the human realm here. We know all about that. And then over here is the God realms. So the God realms can be counted as 1 altogether, or they can be counted as 2, where there's kind of higher, more kind of fortunate, more, I don't know, have lives of greater ease and have greater kind of powers, sort of gods. And then you can see they're battling here in this cloud. So then there's the demigod realm is like here. So these are kind of less powerful gods who are very jealous, apparently, of the more powerful gods, and then they fight each other all the time. And then, so that's, we looked at that before a bit. But our main focus today is the last ring, the last section, the outer ring. So, because here it depicts the 12 links of dependent arising. Maybe before I go into detail of that, though, just this creature is the Lord of Death. So this is just an representation of death, and he's holding this whole wheel between his fangs and his claws, his feet down here, showing that the samsara is all in the mouth of the Lord of Death. Means as long as you take rebirth in samsara through the force of the 3 poisons and the karma. So these are kind of it's kind of like the epicenter. These are the forces driving this whole thing. Then you'll inevitably experience death. So as long as you experience birth through the force of the 3 root poisons and karma, then inevitably you age, you grow old, and then you die. And then if you still haven't abandoned the root cause of samsara, which is here actually ignorance, then you take rebirth again and again. So it's a wheel, because just like a wheel, it just keeps rolling as long as there's causes propelling it to roll along. There's no obstacles to stop it. Then this process continues again and again. And then up here this is the Buddha, Shakyamuni. Well, it's not necessarily Shakyamuni, but it's just a Buddha. And then he's pointing kind of to, well, kind of looks like he's pointing to the moon. I forget the description, the example of that. I think the moon here represents the Dharma, like the purity, the truth of the Dharma, I believe. And in a complete illustration, there's 2 verses actually that are usually depicted like here or at the bottom, that give some kind of they basically say that by practicing the Buddhist teachings, you can be free from the whole process of rebirth and death again and again. Maybe if we have time, I'm not sure I put it in the PowerPoint. I think I did actually at the end. Anyway, why don't I look later? How do I get out of this? Oh, there we go. Let's check what I put. I think I put right at the end. Oh yeah, here. There are these 2 verses. These are usually in the illustration of the Wheel of Death. So I'll send this out later so you'll have. But it says, undertaking this and leaving that, enter into the teachings of the Buddha, like an elephant amidst mud huts, destroy the legions of the Lord of Death. So it means undertaking this and leaving that means basically engage in virtue and leave that, abandon non-virtue actions. Basically, engage in virtuous actions, abandon non-virtuous actions, leaving that. Enter into the teachings of the Buddha. So, learn about, study, contemplate, and meditate on, practice the teachings of the Buddha. And thereby, like an elephant amidst mud huts. So imagine, like in India, a village of huts made of mud. Mud is not very strong. And then like a little village just made of kind of, just basically dried mud. huts by the jungle, and then a whole troop of elephants comes in amongst, and they're in like mating season or something, and they're you know, going crazy. Then they destroy all the mud huts, right? So like a wild elephant, like amidst mud huts, so you destroy them all, destroy the legions of the Lord of Death quite easily. So I was kind of saying, like the mud huts is a illustration of samsara, and the elephant is oneself practicing the Buddhist teachings, destroying the mud huts. So like that, destroy the legions of the Lord of Death. The legions of the Lord of Death means like all the things that are causes and related to death. So basically afflictive emotions, attachment, anger, ignorance, and then non-virtuous actions, and the karma we create, and the things that cause that karma to ripen. All the things that cause us to experience death again and again. So we destroy all of those things, abandon those things. Then the Buddha says, those who, with thorough conscientiousness, practice this taming doctrine, will, having totally abandoned the wheel of birth, bring suffering to an end. So it means those who practice the Dharma with conscientiousness, so very mindfully, deliberately, with caution and wisdom, practice this taming doctrine. So yeah, this phrase taming doctrine, well, it can mean different things. The doctrine can mean the teachings of the Buddha in one hand, and then this modifier taming means the Buddha's teachings are such that if you practice, your mind becomes more and more, and your behavior becomes more and more subdued and peaceful and controlled. Thereby, you can follow a path to lasting happiness. But this phrase "taming doctrine" in Tibetan, it's Due Cho. You can also refer to, of the three baskets of the Buddhist teachings, the Sutra basket, the Abhidharma basket, and the Vinaya basket. It can also refer to the Vinaya, the Buddhist teachings on pure morality, basically. That specifically. So practice this taming doctrine. Then will, having totally abandoned the wheel of birth, so those who practice basically the Buddhist teachings, or especially the pure morality as taught in the Buddhist teachings, the Vinaya, will having totally abandoned the wheel of birth, so having abandoned samsara, bring suffering to an end for themselves and for others. Yeah, so this is usually verse found in the Wheel of Life. But here, okay, so today though we're going to focus on the links, the links around the outside. So first though, I'll give you a sutra quotation. Oh, what happened? I lost my. Let's see. Only the full screen. There we go. So first, there are several sutras where the Buddha discusses the Wheel of Life and the 12 links of dependent arising in the Kangyur. But the most famous is this one called the Rice Seedling Sutra. This is probably where the Buddha gives the most extensive explanation of the 12 links of dependent arising. So here so in the Buddha's own words, he says, Venerable Bhikshus, so he's teaching to an audience of fully ordained monks, Venerable Bhikshus, whoever sees dependent and relative origination or dependent arising, sees the Dharma. So here the Dharma means the truth, essentially, or the essence of the Buddha's teachings. Whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. So only by understanding the truth of the way things exist and the Buddha taught does one understand what the Buddha is. Right. So whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. It's a very profound statement. That's also one support for saying that among the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, that the Dharma is the foremost, because it's only by understanding the Dharma that one understands what a Buddha is and understands what's the whole point of the Sangha. And it's the Dharma which actually frees us from suffering and brings us to full enlightenment. So whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. What is this dependent and relative origination of which I speak? It is this. Because this exists, that arises. Because that is born, this is born. So that's just generally talking about dependent arising. What does it mean? Essentially, here it's talking about dependent arising of cause and effect. But it's basically that things exist in an interrelated way. One thing depends upon another. So here, the way he expresses it is this, because this exists, my pointer, there we go. Because this exists, that arises. So it means because one thing exists, then another thing, its result arises. And then because that is born, so because one thing is born, then again, its result further arises. So like among all impermanent phenomena, so everything that's an object of our senses, all of our minds, our consciousness, ourself as a person. So most things that exist, they're all impermanent phenomena, changing momentarily. And they arise through the force of, they don't just arise from nothing. They're not are not produced by the force of an all-knowing or all-powerful creator, but rather, through the force of causes and conditions. Things come into existence, and then they give rise to, their subsequent, their effects, their results. So just like a sprout, we plant seeds, or seeds fall to the ground, and then they come into contact with soil and moisture, the warmth of the sun, and then from those sprouts grow, and then plants grow up. Then from, animals eat plants, and then animals arise, or light appears, and then objects appear to our eye consciousness, and we develop eye consciousness, seeing things, smelling things. Or people speak words, then we hear the sound, we understand the meaning, and then we generate ideas in our mind dependent on that, so forth and so on. So in short, all things exist, he's saying, as dependent arisings, independence upon other phenomena. So again, Venerable Bhikshus, whoever sees dependent arising, dependent and relative origination, sees the Dharma, or the truth of phenomena. Whoever sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. What is this dependent and relative origination of which I speak? It is this. Because this exists, that arises. Because that is born, this is born. And then he goes on. It is like this. Through the condition of ignorance. So now he's speaking specifically about the dependent arising of samsara. How does samsara arise? Through the condition, or the cause of ignorance, compounding factors. Means compounding factors arise as a result of ignorance. From the condition of compounding factors comes consciousness. From consciousness, or from the condition of consciousness. So the dots there mean kind of like etc. So and that's standard in sutras, that, well, in the way we write them in short form, that there's often like a grammatical structure, or a way of stating things that's just repeated again and again with different parts. So here it means through the condition of, is what it means. So through the condition of name and form comes the 6 sense spheres. Through the condition of the 6 sense spheres arises contact. Through the condition of contact comes feeling. Through the condition of feeling comes craving, then grasping, existence, birth, aging, and death. So those are the 12 from here, from ignorance. My red pen doesn't work very well here, but from ignorance up to aging and death, those are the 12. And I'll list them just below on the next slide. And then it says from the condition of aging and death comes agony, wailing, suffering, unhappiness, and mental disturbance all arise. Like that, merely this enormous heap of suffering arises. So through these 12 links of dependent arising, the heap of suffering, that is samsara. That's the suffering of samsara. All arises. So again, those 12 are depicted here around in these panels around the outside. So why don't I'll show you a list of the 12 first, just to make that absolutely clear. And then we'll come back and match them to the different illustrations. So the first two, which we'll focus on today, are ignorance and compositional factors, 1 and 2 here. So the way they're depicted here is, let's see, zoom in, there we go. Ignorance is depicted as a blind man. Because, yeah, just as a blind person, they can't see with their eyes, so it's difficult for them to see where they're going. And especially imagine if you're someone who grew up sight, and then you suddenly became blind, then it'd be very difficult to find your way around, to see where you're going. Or if you're just in a place where it's completely dark. So like that, then as long as we have ignorance, then we wonder, it's through the force of that it's like being blind to the way that things actually exist, especially being blind to the truth of dependent origination, or the truth of how the law of cause and effect works on the one hand, and being blind to what are the fundamental causes of rebirth, the ignorance, which so being blind to the fundamental cause of rebirth. Then we wander in samsara. So through the force of this ignorance, actually the fundamental ignorance, which is the root of samsara, is a misconception grasping at. It's not just like not knowing something, like literally being without sight just means not being able to see. It doesn't mean ascertaining something in a wrong, mistaken way. But here, the ignorance, which is the root of samsara, is not just not knowing something, but rather it's thinking that something exists in a way it doesn't, right? So it's a step further than not knowing. It's grasping at something as being something that it's not. It's kind of like the difference between, to give maybe a simpler analogy, the difference between like losing your wallet and just not knowing where it is, or losing your wallet and thinking that someone stole it, some particular person like took it when they actually didn't, right? So that's a much more intense, it's much more kind of proactive. It's a much different kind of ignorance. Just not knowing where something is sort of a neutral ignorance, but actively thinking that someone stole your wallet who didn't is a completely different kind of ignorance. It's grasping at something as being in a way that it doesn't at all. So the ignorance, which is the root of samsara, is the second kind. It's not just not knowing, but rather it's thinking that there's a self, essentially, that there's a kind of inherently existent soul or person, that it's especially with regard to how we believe ourselves to exist, that we have this innate sense that there's an essential sort of unchanging identity that we have that just exists by its own power, from its own side, without being a projection of our own concepts and ideas, just through its own power, by its own force, without depending upon causes and conditions, without depending upon different parts, and especially without depending upon mental imputation. We have this innate grasping. So that's what we'll spend more time on that later today. And yeah, to check the time. Anyway, I'll do in a minute. But after we go through, I'll just initially kind of go through the 12 links briefly, and then spend more time on these first two. So, okay, so this is fundamental ignorance, represented by a blind person. And then there's a person here, it's a potter. He's making containers. So this is a symbolic of a representation of karma, or it's called compositional actions here, literally. But so through the force of ignorance, we give rise to attachment to things we're attracted to, and aversion, anger towards things that we're repulsed by. And then through the force of that, we engage in the 10 non-virtuous actions: killing, stealing, lying, adultery, slander, and so forth. and thereby we create karma. We create karmic seeds. So the reason it's represented by a potter making containers is because through the force of our contaminated actions, whereby we create karma, then we plant seeds in the mind to experience suffering in the future. So in that way, they're like karmas, like containers of potential, or it's like containers of like energy to produce future suffering experiences, future rebirth in samsara, essentially. So the main karma it's referring to here is karma, what are called throwing karmas, very powerful karmas, which have the power or the ability to, as we're dying from one life, to throw us into another rebirth. Right. So we'll look at those in more detail, a bit more detail later, throwing karmas. There we go. So then, so that's ignorance and compositional factors, 1 and 2. So yeah, we can just look at the next two: consciousness, and then name and form, 3 and 4. Zoom in. Yeah, there we go. So consciousness is represented here by a monkey, and it's a monkey who's swinging in a tree. It's swinging from tree to tree. So here the trees represent different rebirths, and the monkey swinging from tree to tree is like our consciousness, the stream of our consciousness, which goes from life to life, right? So as for us as a person, we take rebirth. So die from one life, take rebirth in another, then die from that, take rebirth in another. So the main basis of, saying that the person goes from life to life is not, of course, our body doesn't go from life to life. It's our stream of consciousness. The mind, the mental consciousness goes from life to life. So that's represented here by a monkey swinging from tree to tree. So the monkey is like the stream of, or the consciousness, and each tree is like a different life. And then, so why is it? Well, it's related to the first one because great karma. Then where are the seeds of karma? Where do they? How do they function? If we create seeds of karma in one life and then they ripen in a future life, and not necessarily the immediate next life, we can create karma, in this life, and then only after several lifetimes later on does it ripen. So those seeds of karma, how are they? They have to be carried from life to life. So how are they carried? They're carried on the stream of consciousness, right? So when we create karmic seeds, they don't, they're not like something physical that exists in our body, but rather there's something, more subtle than physical. They're also not consciousness. There's this third category of impermanent phenomena called non-associated compositional factors. But you don't have to remember that. But they're kind of impermanent phenomena that exists on or associated with the stream of consciousness. Good stuff. So then, but then when those karmic seeds ripen and we take rebirth, then we at the time of conception, if we're born as a human, then in our mother's womb, then at the very moment of conception, we have name and form, it's called. So that's the fourth link here, represented by people traveling in a boat, is called, sorry. Anyway, yeah, it's called here, called name and form. So there the name represents, name refers to the consciousness that we have. Actually, the name refers to, of the 5 aggregates, refers to the last 4, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. And form refers to our body, the first of the 5 aggregates. So, yeah, I have to remember, why is that represented by people in a boat? I have to kind of use our imagination here to match the actual things to the representations here. But Oh yeah, it's by people in a boat, because just like a boat is a vessel, which takes us from one side of a body of water, like a river or a lake or an ocean, to the other side of the water. Then it's the name. It's this. When we take rebirth, it's like we take rebirth into a vessel of this life, into this body and mind of this life, and then those carry us to the end of that life, and then we leave those, right? And then we take rebirth in another. So that's why there's two people in the boat. Usually there's just two people in a boat. Here's like a person rowing, but there's two passengers in the boat. So that like represents name and form. Basically represents our body and mind, taking rebirth in like the vessel of this life, and then going to the farther shore. So next is a house with 6 windows. So, and then, then a couple lying in. So the house with 6 windows, see if I remember the term. It represents the 6 sense spheres. I believe is a term. Let me check. And then the man and woman lying in union represents contact with physical objects. So the 6 sense spheres represents our, means, let me check the term. Yeah, 6 sense spheres, exactly. And then contact. So 6 sense spheres refers to our eyes, basically our eye, the 6 kinds of consciousness: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and mental consciousness. So it's because, so here name and form begins to exist at the very moment of conception in the womb. So then what happens in the womb as an embryo, we're developing. So we gradually develop eyes, and then ears, nose, tongue, and actually the body is first, right? So the form is body. So that's probably the very first perceptions that we have as a newly conceived like child are probably, sensations of warm and cold, smooth and rough, and so forth, just physical sensations, because our body is there already, right? But then gradually we develop, probably, the eyes is probably like the last. I don't know. Gradually, as we develop ears, we begin to hear sounds. As we develop a nose and tongue, we begin to experience smells and tastes. And then finally, we develop eyes. If we can see, if we have any visual experience in the womb or not, I don't know. But as soon as we're born, we open our eye, or delivered, we open our eyes, and then we see things. And then, but we also have, from very early on, we have mental experiences. So those 5 sense consciousness and then the mental consciousness are the 6 sense spheres. So as they develop, and then, so that, remember, that's represented like a house with 6 windows. So a house with 6 windows, or can have, input from each of the 6 windows. So just like that, with eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, we can receive input from the environment around us. So when we experience objects of any of those 6 sense spheres, then that's called contact. We make contact with the objects. So imagine like your eye consciousness. When going to sleep is like a small death, and then waking up in the morning is like a small birth, right? So even like waking up in the morning, we first open our eyes, and then we see something appears to our eyes, and then we generate a visual consciousness, an awareness of that. So that's like making contact. And then we hear a sound. So that sound, it's like the waves coming through the air from outside. Then because we have a developed ear, then it vibrates our whatever, the eardrum. And then it would develop, and then that our ear consciousness makes contact with that object. So that's what we're talking about. Similarly, when we think about something appears to our mind, our mental consciousness is making contact with an object. So that's the next one, contact. And that, has this racy depiction of this man and woman in union. Because that's, I think, and why they use that illustration, because that's one of the most powerful, on one hand, because it's kind of it's one of the most powerfully emotive sort of experiences that we have. It's like sexual contact, you know. And another, I mean, because it just gives rise to very, very strong, you know, emotions, and very strong kind of experiences, be the physical or mental experiences. Another is probably because sexual, that kind of sexual contact with another person, it involves all six of the sense spheres, right? There's taste, smell, obviously touch. Physical touch is the main one. Then sight, you hear, and then also sound. And then also there's strong mental experience. So that's like, you know, making contact. And also kind of as a person matures, once, of course, the six sense spheres, they mature through while we're in the womb. And then after we're delivered from the womb, you know, they continue to grow. Our eyes, ears, nose, tongue continue to change and develop. Like we can see as a young person, you know, as a child, maybe, you know, none of us likes mushrooms probably, or coffee, or drinks, alcohol. But then as you mature, your taste buds like change. Also kind of your ideas change, but the way you experience those changes. But also like as a child, you haven't, before you've gone through puberty, you don't have the ability to have that powerful experience of sexual contact. So that's also a way our body changes. And then, you know, and then once we've gone through puberty and become kind of fully mature, then that's also a representation of like the full maturation of our ability to experience objects of experience in the world. And then the next one is what? A man with an arrow poking in his eye. Can you imagine? That must be very painful. I hope we never have to experience that. But why? Because that's it's a depiction of feeling. So from contact with objects, then comes feelings. Of course, they're not all the feelings we have, fortunately, are not like arrows sticking in our eye. But that's a depiction of one of the worst possible, most painful feelings. Of course, we have pleasant feelings and painful feelings both. But it's like by contact with, what's being depicted here is by contact with objects, we give rise to these very strong feelings of pleasure, very powerful pleasure, or very powerful pain, and then the whole range of in between, from neutral feelings, you know, to very powerful pleasure and unpleasurable, and then medium, mild, whatever in between. So this whole range of feelings develop. And then the next two are like a pair, craving and grasping. So craving is represented by an alcoholic, basically someone who's drinking alcohol, very attached to, probably addicted to alcohol, because that's a representation of independence upon pleasant feelings. So from contact, we generate feelings, and dependence upon pleasant feelings, we crave the pleasure of those feelings again and again and again. Just like someone who, you know, who's attached to alcohol, they crave the whole experience of, you know, the taste and then the feelings that come, the kind of mental state that one gets into from being inebriated. And then we kind of crave it like uncontrollably. We want it again and again. And then a stronger form of craving is represented here by a monkey in a tree. So yeah, I was just in Dharamsala the week before last. There's a lot of monkeys there. I don't know, any of you been to Dharamsala, especially around Tushita Meditation Center? There's tons of monkeys. It's quite disturbing actually, because they're so precisely because of this, because their craving is so intense. You know, they're craving for food, or they're craving to mate, or their attachment to their young, or their attachment to just like their territory, very territorial. And so because they have very strong attachment to things, and they get angry, and then they get quite agitated, and they can they can become dangerous. So here this intensified form of craving is represented by a monkey like grasping at fruit in a tree. You can see how monkeys, especially around Dharamsala, there's not so much fruit in the trees, but there's garbage around with like fruit and stuff in the garbage. That's what they eat a lot. Or of course, if there's bananas or sometimes tormas put out at Shishida, but they get so like intensely like attached. It's not just like, oh yeah, I'd like some. If I have some, it's nice. If I don't, it's okay. It's like, no, I have to have that. If anything gets in my way, I'm going to attack it. So yeah, there's this really intense kind of craving, which is called grasping. And then, so the force of these two are like a pair, it's craving and grasping. And these are like it's kind of like the main factors which ripen the seeds of karma. So you can imagine, like, as you're dying, and then you have, as we're dying, then we naturally, we fear like being separated from everything we've known in this life, all of our friends, our family, our possessions, being separated from our very body. I mean, can you imagine? Most of us, we don't have any memories of ever leaving our body. But then all of a sudden, it's this thing that we strongly identify with as me, our body, our conscious experience being conjoined with our body. So as we're dying, that starts to disintegrate, and I can kind of imagine, we can feel like we're being like separated from not only everything, all the people we've known, our possessions, our whole experience of the environment, but also being separated from like our very own body. And so this innate craving and grasping to exist as a person, as the person we identify we are, like that arises very strongly. And that acts as a seed, that acts as like the kind of the main condition to ripen the seeds of karma to throw our next life. So that process is called here. Where's my little cursor? There we are. Existence. So here, this is not a very clear illustration, but it's a pregnant woman. A woman who's like in the third trimester, or near the end of term. Showing, so this is called existence. So this is what existence is like. Well, imagine, I mean, here's a woman about to give birth. So it's like the conditions for, a child to be produced and fully developed and then kind of be delivered have all sort of come together, and the child is just about to be born, just about to, be produced. So another way, another analogy for this link of existence, this is the 9th link. No, it's the 10th link of existence, is like a seed. So it's like a seed of karma. And imagine a seed that has been, soaked in water or in moist soil for some time, and it's become, it kind of bulges up, it becomes soft, and then maybe the husk starts to crack, and it's just about to send out a first shoot of a sprout, right? So craving and grasping are like the moisture that ripens the seeds of karma. And then the karmic seed that's just about to produce a result is called existence. Why it's called existence? Basically because it's like just about to actually become a rebirth. And then the next link, 11 here, is birth. So this is, a woman giving birth, because that's when the karmic seed actually produces a rebirth. Is that? And then as soon as rebirth exists, it's followed by old age and death. So this is a person, sometimes it's depicted as an old man carrying a corpse. So why are old age and death in one link? To indicate that as soon as we take rebirth, it's, from the very second moment we're aging. We're coming closer to death. So old age doesn't mean like, over 65 or something here. It means aging from the second moment from the very moment after birth, then we're becoming older, coming closer to death. And in that way, it doesn't exist just after being delivered. Actually, it's the second moment after conception that we start aging, right? And then because we've taken rebirth in a life, then eventually that ends in death, right? Unless we somehow escape from samsara before that. So those are the 12 links. So how are we on time? Oh, perfect. Or exactly halfway. Do you have any questions immediately about any of those?
I have one question, Venerable.
Mhm.
So, does samsara actually exist in reality, or is samsara only there because I'm stuck because of my because of the three poisons, because of my karma, because of the existence, because of the realm that I'm in, and because of the dependent links? Is it only exist because I perceive it to exist because I have not yet reached my own state of enlightenment?
Yeah. Well, okay. So you say does samsara exist in reality, or does it only exist because of all these different causes and conditions that come together that cause my perception of reality,
Right.
that cause my perception of it? So what would it mean for samsara to exist in reality? Option A. What would that mean?
I don't know, and the reason which is the reason I ask, and the reason I don't know is because if it exists solely because of my inability to perceive things as they are, as opposed to I perceive things as I perceive things, again based on the three poisons and whichever realm and my karma and whichever realm of existence I happen to be in, and whichever, you know, at that particular time, whichever of the 12 links I'm living through at that time. Because, you know, I could be surrounded by riches and feel like I'm in a poop hole, and I could be surrounded by dung and think that I'm the richest person in the whole world. So that's what I'm asking. Does it really exist? And we just don't know how to understand it and see it? Or does it not exist?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, but the way you're kind of using "does it really exist" almost means like, well, because then you're contrasting that with, or does it really exist, or does it exist, you know, because of all these things that give rise to our perception of the existence of it, which would mean that really exists means it kind of exists somehow independently of our perception, right? As something that doesn't depend upon, you know, the afflictive emotions and our karma, and thereby my having these sixth sense fears and, you know, seeing things and then being attracted to some and repulsed by other, and then that throwing me into rebirth. That, you know, apart from all that, there's some kind of like real samsara. That doesn't exist. There's nothing exists. I mean, that's the whole point of the Buddhist view of selflessness, is there is no real existence at all. Everything boils down to our mind and the way our mind perceives things and the way we experience things. There's no deeper level of reality than that. But I mean, that's difficult. Well, maybe when we look at ignorance, that all comes up, but that's difficult to kind of stomach in one way, because we have this perception, especially of an external physical world, and you know, we kind of grow up learning about, you know, Darwinian evolution and evolution, you know, the our solar system, our galaxy, our solar system, our planet, all developing in all this billions of years, when it seems like there's no people existing, no conscious existence, no consciousness at all. So we have that kind of strong view. So we tend to have this tendency to think that there's this external physical reality, totally independent of our minds, consciousness. But Buddhism doesn't accept that. That actually, according to Buddhist view, actually consciousness and awareness is the most fundamental kind of force in the universe. And then this kind of perception of an external physical world there is an external physical world, but it exists independence upon perception by consciousness. And that's where it's very helpful to look at like quantum mechanics, because when you look at these most fundamental building blocks of the physical world, you see that they don't seem to be, they're not like localized, quantifiable kind of discrete particles. Rather, things exist in a state of superposition, a state of potentiality. Just the most fundamental building blocks of the physical world, in short, are not so kind of real as we ordinarily think the physical world is. Yeah. So in short, yeah, samsara. I mean, if it was kind of real in the way you're saying, then there'd be no way to get rid of it, right? But it's because it's a product of all these kind of afflictive forces in our minds and the minds of others around us. Like, why do we have this shared experience? Because we have kind of karma that matches. So we create this shared experience of a world.
Thank you.
Like if we were to die and take rebirth as like a kind of animal, like say a bee, then we would have this shared experience with a completely different kind of creature. So like right now, when we think about like the bee world, it's just something we have just some kind of vague imagination of what it would like to be a bee. But we don't really know like what, the experiential world of a bee is like, because we don't have the karma to experience that. But if we died and took rebirth through if we had the karma to take rebirth as a bee, and then we died and took rebirth as a bee in a hive somewhere, because that's how bees live, then we would have this whole shared experience with all the other bees in the hive. That would be something completely different. And that's real, no? That's completely real. That's the reality of a bee. Yeah. In the same way, like we tend to think, because we're humans, we tend to think that the way our human experience of the world is reality, independent of us being humans. But that's actually just a kind of that's a kind of I don't know. There's a kind of mistake we make, like, because imagine, like, I don't know, the bees rule the world, for example. And somehow humans were just like these little creatures that lived in little boxes in fields in different places. But the world was actually ruled by bees. I don't know, you can kind of imagine switching, like the bee reality is just as valid, and the bee experience and reality of the world is just as valid and real as the human experience of the world, although it's something we don't really give much attention to. We don't really imagine much. But similarly, there's countless other creatures. I mean, other kinds of humans, other animals, and then like we were just looking at, there's hell beings, hungry ghosts, gods, demigods, and they all have, through the force of their karma, they all have these totally different experiences of different kinds of worlds in a way, and they're all just as real as ours. So this human experience is not, it doesn't have any more reality status than any of the others, and they're all projections of karma, right? So that's the Buddhist view, is like every world, every kind of reality for a different type of creature is a projection of their karma, the forces in the mind. Anyway, let's take a 10-minute break, shall we? So let's do a little meditation now. Generally, on the wheel of life, yeah, it's, in one way, it's not like a simple I mean, there's a lot to meditate on in this whole depiction, right? Because there's so much going on. There's the three root, poisons in the middle, and then there's karma, all about karma, and then how those two primarily give rise to rebirth in the different realms, and then the 12 links of dependent arising on the outside, specifically how, it's like in more detail, how this process of creating karma, the karma ripening, and then taking rebirth, how that unfolds, which I've only explained just very briefly. We'll go into that in more detail in the rest of this session and next week as well. But why don't we just try to as a way to like consolidate whatever understanding and deepen whatever understanding we've gained so far. Yeah, meditate a bit. But of course, as we learn more and more about each of these parts, just like just in the first part, thinking about the dove and the snake in the middle. The dove represents attachment. Then the whole third session, when we spoke all about attachment, like everything from that session is included there. And then the snake representing anger, everything we learned about anger is included there. Today more, we'll speak about how those two come from ignorance. We'll speak more about ignorance. But so as we learned, in short, as we learned about each of the parts, like the whole module, I don't know if you did earlier, but the module on karma is all included in the second ring here. And then all about the realms, and then the 12 links of the dependent rising. So in short, as we learn more and more about each of the parts, the meditation becomes richer and richer. But yeah, let's take 5 minutes or so and meditate on the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 main kind of different parts of the wheel of life in general. So first thing I think we'll reflect on just for a bit is how, so we can start with attachment and anger. And then looking at how those arise from this fundamental ignorance grasping at an inherently existent self. So maybe it's a little difficult to identify this sense, this grasping at an inherently existent self. But what we can check and try to get a sense of is how our own attachment and anger, they arise from selfishness, being selfish or self-centered or egocentric attitude. So first, just try to reflect on that. Bring to mind some clear instances. Again, not ones that are some clear instances of attachment and anger, not ones that are so strong that when you think of it, you get totally distracted thinking about that, but ones that are strong enough so that you can clearly identify as attachment or as anger, but still reflect on it in an objective and kind of constructive way. So bring to mind an instance of either just attachment or anger or one of each. And then look to see, is it true that those arise from a selfish or self-centered concern and a stronger sense of a real self? Although we could spend a lot of time looking at this. Let's move on and look at, so karma.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
So karma. Yeah. I think someone else might be unmuted. Heard someone else for a moment, so I thought,
That's me, sorry.
no problem. Okay, so then these three root poisons at the middle: attachment, anger, and ignorance. With ignorance being fundamental, so this selfish, self-centered concern, like a kind of strong egoistic sense, giving rise to attachment to what we perceive as pleasurable, aversion to what we perceive as unpleasant. So then look at how then those give rise to karma. So maybe it's probably easiest to think about negative karmas we've created, like lying to someone or killing another creature, or deceiving someone, or stealing something maybe. So try to find a clear example of a karma. It can also be a positive karma, but the negative ones are a little easier to identify at the beginning. Or try to think of a clear example of a karmic action one created. Maybe one that's so powerful that you think might have the power to throw a rebirth. Something we've done in this life. The motivated, and try to make the connection between, motivated by the kind of strong sense of this ignorance grasping at an inherent existent I, that I was either attached to something or averse to something, and then compelled by that, then I did something, created some kind of karmic action. And then imagine if that karma were to ripen as oneself died away from this life. If that karma were to ripen, what kind of rebirth would it produce? And kind of try to fill out the picture of that a little bit. The process of dying away from this life, the mind craving and grasping, at existence, at one's own identity, and existing as a discrete person, then ripening that karmic seed, and then the karma actually throwing oneself into a sort of whatever type of rebirth you think it might produce, and then arising in that whole experience of that type of rebirth. So spend a couple minutes, try to imagine that process. And then finally, imagine in that future life. So we've contemplated how in this life, then through this grasping, strong grasping at a self, and then giving rise to selfish concern, then that gives rise to attachment and anger, and all the other afflictive emotions that are branches of those. And then those compel us to engage in contaminated actions, karma, and create karma. And then imagine how these strong karmas, especially the throwing karmas, which have the power to throw a rebirth, then one of them will ripen at the time of death in this life and throw a future life. So then imagine in the future life how that process repeats itself. Again, we give rise to afflictive emotions, create karma. Karmic seeds are planted in our mental continuum, or the continuum of the person. And then again, as we die from that life, they're caused to ripen and throw us into a rebirth again. So imagine that process in the future life. Okay, so let's stop there, the meditation for now. So you can see how, I hope, through the meditation, how this diagram works, right? So there's these three root afflictions at the center, the most fundamental of which is ignorance. And then that gives rise to these. So that's more detail. And then of the 12 links, there's this one of ignorance, right? And then this one's karma, right? So karma is the next ring out here. But there's a lot going on between those, right? So, because this fundamental ignorance gives rise to both anger and attachment, right? And then all the other, then arrogant pride, self doubt, kind of afflictive doubt, afflictive fear, miserliness, spite, vengeance, lust, greed, jealousy. All the other kind of afflictive emotions are kind of branches of this first link of ignorance, right? And then so as those different afflictive emotions arise, then they compel us to engage in actions, both virtuous and non-virtuous actions, which then produce karma, right? So the second section, and this here. And then the rest of the thing is kind of about how that karma either is how it plays out, how it produces results, So here, like in name and form, then the six sense spheres, and then contact with objects, then that gives rise to feeling. Or how the karma is caused to ripen, like here with craving and grasping, they cause the karmic seeds to ripen. And then the state when the karma is just about to produce its effect. And then more results. I mean, there's then the birth, aging, and death. So basically, these 12 links of dependent arising are all part of this story that's illustrated in the middle part of the wheel. How afflictive emotions, or the three root poisons, give rise to karma, and that produces, rebirth in the six realms of existence. So, yeah. Are there any questions about that kind of whole process? I mean, that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time looking in more detail at different parts of that. But if there's any other questions now, or questions about how to meditate on it, then I can try to address. Otherwise, I'll just keep explaining. It's my job. No? Okay. But yeah, I mean, one of the big challenges looking at this topic, I always find, in the Buddhist teachings and the Lamrim, some topics are more easy to relate to our own experience than others. And this one is a little difficult because it's so kind of complex. There's so many things involved. So that's why it's important when we meditate on it, just to kind of break it down into small bite-sized pieces and meditate on one piece at a time and relate it to our own experience. And then gradually build up this whole sense of our own experience. So starting with, this is why I started just now, we started with attachment in the middle. Just start with an instance of our own anger or attachment. And then try to see how that's related to our own kind of strong sense of grasping at a self or ignorance. And then how that gives rise to karma, our own karma that we've created. And then how that karma might play out and produce our own experience. So we have to relate it back to our own experience again and again. Okay, Kodo?
You said exactly where I always double back into the mind being beginningless and endless. And I don't have a direct experience of that. I've seen past lives. I've seen other things that I have complete faith in because I've seen them and felt them. But the mind, we just got, by faith, we believe that because Buddha, when he became enlightened and he was in his state of incredibleness, he didn't see anything before that. Like the dependent arising, this happens because that happened, but he couldn't see anything before mind. Is that correct? Thank you.
Well, that mind is beginningless, endless is correct, but the reason for asserting that is not really because the Buddha, and he's still in a state of incredibleness, we just can't see. No, but it's not because he didn't see. It's more like a logical conclusion based on our own experience that we come to. Well, maybe it's a little easier to think about the mind being endless because, yeah, I mean, we can look at how consciousness arises in our own experience. We see it has a kind of energy that are just, so without looking at, without paying it primarily attention to, specific consciousness, instances of consciousness, like seeing something or hearing some particular sound or thinking some particular thought, but trying to look at kind of the fundamental stuff that consciousness is in each moment. They're just kind of being aware, that which is clear and knowing. And we can see how that's sort of the energy of being aware of something. It seems to have its own inertia. such that it produces a subsequent moment of awareness again and again. Now, instances where that becomes, weaker are like when we fall asleep and we're sleeping, or we faint. But even like through sleep, there seems to be this kind of continuity of awareness, because when someone shakes us or there's a loud sound or something, we'll wake up. And because also we wake up in the morning. If there wasn't some continuity of consciousness while we're sleeping, then we would just be a corpse, right? We wouldn't wake up. But the difficulty is because we feel like, well, we don't generally have experience of our consciousness functioning independent of our brains and our body. So that we have a hard time imagining that if the whole body dies, then how could there be consciousness still functioning? So, but that there's a lot of evidence for. I don't have time to go into it now, but if you look at studies of like Ian Stevenson's research and now Jim Tucker on children who remember previous lives, and then other people's research these days, Sam Parnia, in the past Pim Van Lommel, research on people who have near-death experiences, people who are clinically dead, but have especially third-person veridical experiences. Means they have experiences while they're clinically dead. Their heart's not beating, their brain's not functioning, but yet they have experiences which other people can verify was actual. They were experiencing actual kind of reality. So near-death experiences, there's a lot of evidence. Anyway, there's a lot of evidence that consciousness can function. There are levels, subtle levels of consciousness that exist and function independently of brain function. Although that's not, in our waking experience, it's not generally how we don't have experience of that. But we can see, I don't know. For me, I find it quite compelling to see how consciousness has this fundamental energy that gives rise to subsequent moments of awareness. And then what would cause that to cease ever? If there's subtle levels of consciousness not dependent on brain function, then what could cause that to cease? And it's difficult to find anything there. And then the other question is, well, that we assert beginningless past lives, is it helps a lot to think about the moment of conception in this life. So if basically there's a first moment of conception, right? When the sperm and egg of our parents conjoin and then start replicating themselves. The cells start replicating themselves. Then, so if there's no previous moment of consciousness, then it means the conscious experience we have, it just arose from the growth of those cells, right? But then the question is, how could those physical cells produce the kind of conscious experience that we have? Is our conscious experience really just a byproduct of physical interactions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Koda, I think you can.
I am a mother, and when at the moment of conception, I felt the spirit or the wind or whatever you want to call it of my daughter come in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I don't have a problem with something, wind, whatever you want to call it, entering. I've felt that. And
yeah, so then if that's the case, that consciousness, with a subtle kind of energy, like a wind energy that goes together with it, if it had the power to like exist independent of a body, before the moment of conception, then again in the past, what could possibly then cause it to not exist? It's producing a continuity of its own existence, before it was conjoined with the body, when it's not conjoined with anyone else's body or any cells. So then it has the energy to kind of, exist through time. So what in the past could possibly cause it to not exist? And more, I guess, more pertinently, like how could it begin? What would be a beginning of it? Then because something can arise from nothing. And then there would have had to been like more fundamental things that produced it. But what would that be? So like in the Hindu tradition, they would assert like it's kind of like a individual stream of consciousness is like a stream coming from a big lake. So there's like a universal consciousness, and everyone's kind of like a divergent stream of that. But in Buddhism, they totally don't accept, because that would mean we would have to have shared memories, for example, of things in the distant past. Memories like of other people's experience or of that universal kind of consciousness, but we don't. Yeah, then there's other problems too, but yeah, but then anyway, to think about the beginning consciousness, you'd have to think, because there'd have to be some beginning to that stream of consciousness. So how would that be? You have to come up with a good story, no? That makes sense. So Buddhists find it's more logical just to posit no beginning, individual stream of consciousness from no beginning. Anyway, it's a little bit divergent, but good question. Okay. So if there's no other questions, then let's continue. Okay, so these 12 links of dependent arising. So maybe just to make another pass through this, and then I'll talk more about ignorance. Okay, the first one, because we'll go over this again next week. But so just imagine, the way to imagine, well, yeah, you see, one of the most difficult things about understanding the 12 links of dependent arising is they're not in a purely chronological order. And that's intentional. There's different groups, which we'll come to next week, but you can group them in different ways to show how they're like interlinking, how like one set of the 12 links to be complete, it has to interact with another set of the 12 links, right? So what these 12 links, what do they describe is sort of how we progress from this having this fundamental kind of ignorance, then produce compositional actions, which is another name for like karmic actions. And then the seeds of those are in the consciousness. But then see those seeds that are in the consciousness, they ripen when they ripen, they produce an effect, which is name and form, which is the body and mind at the time of conception, put it this way. But then how do they ripen? Remember, is these two over here, craving and grasping. It's craving and grasping that basically interact with these seeds of karma that are in the consciousness. I don't know, I need a different color, like pointer here. Michael, how do I change the color of my pen? Oh, ink color, here, I got it. Okay, here we go. Ta-da. Okay, so it's these craving and grasping. Remember, it's the moisture that ripens the seed. The seed is here, the seed of compositional actions, and it's carried on the stream of consciousness. So these ripen that seed, and then that produces rebirth. This is name and form at the time of conception. So this name and form, this link, actually happens at the same time as birth. Right? Don't worry if you don't get it all now. That's why I'm spending a few sessions on it. So because we'll come back to it. But when the seed of karma ripens as name and form, actually that's simultaneous with the link of birth. So this is the moment of conception. We're born, and then the body is developing for a human in the embryo. There's different kinds of birth, but and then develops as the sixth sense sphere. So as the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body develops all the way through puberty, and then the mental consciousness develops. We have more and more potential to experience objects and have contact with more and more objects of the five sense consciousness or of the mind, right? And then contact with those objects produces feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feelings. through the force of, especially, well, through the force of pleasant feelings, we have craving to be conjoined with something, to be with an object, to experience it again. Remember, like the craving, like a person drinking alcohol, through the pleasant experience of like having a nice glass of wine, a beer or something, you feel relaxed, kind of happy, pleasant, then you want to have that again. But craving and grasping can also be craving and grasping to be away from something, through having a really miserable conversation or interaction with someone, we crave like to never see that person again. So that can also be kind of craving, grasping, to not have something happen. So remember, so those feelings, so see the feeling, so this is a big link here. This is a big order right here between feeling, give rise to craving, grasping, because the feelings that give rise to a craving and grasping, they have to belong to different sets of the 12 links. So how is that? Because remember, when we have a feeling arise, that's a product of a previous karma. We created the karmic seed happened, and then an earlier instance of craving and grasping ripened that karma to happen. Then we took birth, and then we developed 6 senses, made contact, had feeling, and then that feeling gives rise to craving and grasping that belongs to a different set of the 12 links, right? And that ripens a different karma. So the 2 places we can really stop. So the 12 links, not only, it's like by virtue of describing how we take rebirth in samsara, it describes how we can stop that process, right? How we can be free from samsara. So the 2 big places we can stop samsara are here. This is the main one we usually focus on: ignorance, generating the wisdom to eliminate this fundamental ignorance, grasping at this exaggerated sense of self. So we can get rid of that. Or we can also stop samsara like here by, well, basically like, it's kind of like here at this border, by when we give rise to feelings, not letting that lead into craving and grasping, just experiencing feelings with sort of neutrality. So this is, craving and grasping are instances of attachment. So yeah, one way to stop samsara, I mean, not in fundamentally, but kind of, I don't know. It's like gain more control over how you take rebirth. It's just reduce attachment, reduce craving and grasping. And as an alternate to those, take rebirth through the force of prayer and virtue, roots of merit and prayer, intention. Yeah, this is one big boundary. But then, okay, so the feeling and grasping, which is a product of a previous karma ripening, then that triggers craving and grasping of another set of 12 links. That, though craving and grasping, remember, they ripen a different karma, again, we created before. And then when it's fully ripened, its potential, and then it produces another birth, gives rise to another birth, which happens again simultaneous to another set of name and form, and then aging and death. So, well, I don't think we have time today, but yeah, we don't, because we're just almost done. But we'll try to imagine. That's why when we just did the meditation now after the break, I was saying, remember how we started? Think about instance of attachment and anger, how that arises from ignorance. How we, created some karma through that. I know for like myself, I used to be a commercial fisherman. For a few summers, I did commercial fishing in Alaska. So like my big, obvious sort of big karma I created was basically through craving money, wanting to make a lot of money, going and killing like thousands of fish, hundreds of thousands of fish. There's a big karma, And then how would that karma ripen? Rebirth as a fish, obviously, many times. And then you can imagine, okay, so there's attachment for me, like to money. Then, which actually I wanted to do travel and stuff and come to Asia, learn how to meditate. But so there's a attachment, which arises from, selfish concern. And then create a karma, okay, killing fish. then how would that karma play out? Take rebirth as a fish. So that's kind of one set of 12 links. But then as a fish, then you develop, okay, you take rebirth as a fish, develop a body, then, experience delicious fish foods. I don't know, little minnows. I would, because I was fishing for salmon, right? So I was imagining rebirth as a salmon. So then salmon, go swimming around the ocean and chase after little fish because you crave existence. And then you develop feeling. And salmon, they die right after they mate. They return to the stream from which they came, which is we catch them right before that, or try to, or the fishermen do. And then, but then, so if they're not caught, of course, they go upstream and then they mate. And then they die like soon after that. So you can imagine then, they've just generated this strong attachment to like mating. And then as they're dying, yeah, I don't know what they think, but it's pretty much instinctual. There's probably some kind of craving for existence continue. And then that ripens another karma that they've created, ripens another karma. So in that life as a salmon, you would have also have ignorance, also have attachment, create karma. Those karmic seeds are in the mind stream. Then as you're dying, have craving and grasping arise again. That causes another karma to ripen, throws you into another rebirth. Then in the next rebirth, same process. So that's how it continues. And these 12 links, kind of different sets of 12 links are interlinking. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, any last questions I can answer? Otherwise, we'll just dedicate and then continue next week. So in the maybe also just to let you know, in the meantime, I'll send to Venerable Dundrup these kind of outlines and the slides. So maybe it might help in addition to the required reading. Liberation of the palm of your hand has quite a good detailed description. The other readings, I'm not sure. So we'll look more at ignorance in detail next week. And then karma. But then there's these different ways of grouping the 12 links according to 4 different types of links. I think this is described in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. And then according to 3 different types of links, afflictions or poisons, karma, and sufferings. So that's what we'll also look at next, to try to see more how the different links interact with each other to perpetuate sort of existence in samsara. Okay. So let's just briefly dedicate by the force of whatever merit we've created. May we and all such beings be free from every form of suffering. And then may we and all such beings have every form of well-being and happiness up to full enlightenment. Okay. Thank you all. See you next week.